Support your state trooper.
I'm Trooper Dave Levendusky of the Indiana State Police.
We didn't really know much about it when we first became acquainted. And it's interesting to note, and Linden can tell on that, we actually made the IDAC system rules and regulations after NCIC's rules, because the NCIC was an FBI computer.
How did the state police get involved with the NCIC?
It was just part of the overall information systems. It was in use as, initially with the federal government, and then it expanded to states all across the country. It's interesting, I started there in 1956 as a Morse code operator of all things, and Morse code is, it's not forgotten, but it's certainly not as prevalent as it was. But that was our principal means of communication from all the states and all of our posts. And I did that probably for about 8 years. And then a teletype system came in to replace that means of communication. And then probably in 1968, late 1968, the department decided to select 3 guys to bring us into the exciting world of computer communications. And I was lucky enough to be one of those 3 guys. At that time, Jack was the commander of the communications division, and later headed up the organization that oversaw the development of IDACs across the state of Indiana. So the work of developing the system itself started in 1969, and I assisted a former state police employee in developing the field definitions and that sort of thing for the actual computer work, and then ultimately I wrote the first operations manual for that system. But Jack managed the operation of the body that oversaw its development that ended up encompassing all of the police departments within the state of Indiana. The system came into operation probably in 1970. 69 was devoted mostly to building the system, and I think it came in operation in 1970. And I think it's been one of the major advancements for efficiency within police departments, both within Indiana and across the nation. Would you agree, Jack?
Absolutely. When we started, we had no idea how that thing would go. And we spent a lot of time in the field encouraging the police departments to join the system. And they too didn't have a clue what it was all about. But they eventually joined, and then those that had turned us down in the initial runaround, they came to us because they found out how these other agencies were doing. In the early days, to get information, you had to go through the radio room. They had to go through whatever files they had to relay it back to whoever was on the road, and it just took endless time. And when the computer world came about, to be able to get that information within a matter of less than a minute was just unbelievable.
Actually, I think our response time from NCIC was like 3 seconds. We'd make an inquiry on a person or a situation, and the information came back as quickly as a computer could work. It was absolutely amazing and absolutely wonderful. Jack mentioned the different police departments, and I'll have to say that training those was kind of fun. We had a small group, which Jack, I suppose, actually was responsible for. But several of us went out and did the training of the individual departments, and it was fun because at that time communications itself was not quite as advanced as it probably is today, and not capable of handling all of the different things that had to take place to get information back and forth. And sometimes training was a chore because of the ability to get the information, to get hooked onto a system so you could show the people how to use it.
Right. The computers were basically the size of rooms?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, you'd have a room full of computers and the storage equipment and all that sort of thing. And I think that what would be a desktop model now might replace a whole room full of equipment at that time.
Have you kept up with the advancements of the technology, such as, have you watched the progression from when you started doing this past your retirement and looking at what technology is now that handles this work?
I haven't. Jack probably did more than I did because he stayed with the department longer than I did. But I did stop in the Plainfield, Indiana, where both Jack and I live now. Stopped in the police station there. Gosh, it's probably been 10 years ago. And the chief of police there showed me what was their IDAX manual 10 years ago. And strangely enough, there was still some of my original writing in that thing in spite of the progression of technology over the period of time that I'd been away from it.
Some things you just can't improve on.
I think anything I've touched could be improved on.
Going back just slightly, when we were trying to get the people around the state to join the system, we decided to organize a committee called the IDAX Committee. And on that committee were members of the police, the fire, sheriff's office, so on, because we wanted them to have a voice in the system as it progressed. Interesting to note, that committee still is operating just like it did when we organized it today. And just recently I had an occasion I'm a police commissioner at Plainfield, and one of my new commissioners asked me what IDAX was. So we got out some of the old information that he had. Said, if you read this when you have time, it'll explain to you just exactly what the system is, and you can see how valuable it is to us today. The new people coming in on the department of having all this equipment, I don't know whether they really stop and think too much about it or not. Maybe someone that's interested in history would, but in our lifetime, we started out in police cars that were straight stick, no radio except the police radio, no AM, FM radio, no air conditioning. They did have a heater in those days. Nice. Today, when you get in one of these cars, it's hard to believe how much equipment they have. Inboard computer, inboard camera, whatever else, who knows.
And it's all at their fingertips.
You know, they can follow a car and get the information on the registration and who should supposedly be driving that car. They can also check if that's a particular person is that body. They can check his records and before they ever stop the car. So that's something we lived to see, because in the early days it wasn't like that at all.
Do you remember the first time that the switch was flipped and it did what it was supposed to do?
I remember some of the early testing of the system, and I mentioned earlier the former state police employee that was actively involved through central data processing in doing the actual putting together the system. He and I worked closely together. His name was Charles Woodard, and he had been a communications supervisor. But he was running a test one day and made an inquiry, I think, on a person. And the information started coming back, and you know how quickly that a printer works. It printed out sheet after sheet and minute after minute, And after about 45 minutes, he turned it off. We had a wad of paper. And so that was one of the early tests that whenever it became just strictly operational and of use to all the state police posts, which of course were the first to use it in Indiana. Why, I'm not sure when the actual switch flipping took place.
Yeah, you know, it's rather interesting. Computers had never been outside the room with their information. When we sat down with the computer people, the what they call that, the computer downstairs in the state office building,
Central data processing.
central data processing people, we suddenly realized, we sat down with them, they were talking one language, we were talking another for communication. So we kind of had to get on each other's side to see what we were talking about to get the first system to work. And that took some doing.
When you were on the department back then, was there any one person that was a mentor to you that stood out that you're forever grateful of them taking you by the hand and showing you a direction of interest?
Well, I'm probably the guy Jack would mention. He probably thinks of me as a mentor. Is that right, Jack?
That's what I'm saying. I didn't want to say it, but it doesn't cost anything to.
So actually, I lied.
It was. I think it was so new that you know, we were just going across ground nobody had been before,
That's right.
And it was fun.
and it was.
Well, it was fun. It was rewarding.
Yeah,
And
very
it's
rewarding.
now to think of what it's done for law enforcement. I mean, across the entire country, things that weren't even dreamed of at the time this system came in operation, as far as police intelligence, now is there at the fingertips of the different officers scattered all over the state. It's a blessing.
And we had departments from other parts of the state come in, even out of state. I remember Illinois sent some people to see our system. Ohio did the same.
Yeah.
So we kind of take a little credit for pioneering it.
Two pioneers in the Indiana State Police, kind of a benchmark.
I guess you could say that.
100 years from now, who will care?
No, that's true. Did we happen to mention what the NCIC and what's the name of our system?
IDEX?
Yeah, IDAX, what that stood for? IDAX was Indiana Data and Communication System, and I'm not sure which of us came up with the name for it, but that's what IDAX stands for. And of course, I think we've already mentioned that NCIC stood for the National Crime Information Center in Washington, D.C.
You look forward to, these events?
Absolutely.
It's really nice to see the different people, although as I age, I find that there's less and less people. I've been gone from the department 37 years. So there's less and less people that I know, but it's nice to see the ones that I do.
And this department's always been a sort of a family. A little different than some.